Good evening and welcome to another edition of Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd and I'll be your host for the next hour of answering your gardening questions. Once again, I'm joined by our expert panel from Nebraska Extension and Landscape Services. We have Jim Kalish answering our insect questions.
Good evening, everybody.
Dennis Ferraro, the critter creature, is going to be getting turf questions. Or not.
Just critters and turf.
Sarah Browning takes up the Rots and Spots chair.
We're really mixing it up tonight.
We are, and answering our horticulture questions, we have Jeff Culbertson.
Glad to be here, Kim.
You know, if you have gardening questions, we hope you'll join us also. Just dial 402-472-1212 in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 1-800-676-5446. Our email address is byf@unl.edu. We do answer those questions on future shows. Give us as much information as you can, including if you live in the state. We also have plenty of great social media sites you can visit to follow Backyard Farmer during the week. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the Backyard Farmer website all fall into that category. Before we get to your questions, let's take a look at a few samples. That looks remarkably like a cow pie.
Well, essentially it might be. I want to show tonight what can happen potentially if you're mowing your yard and you neglect cleaning that undercarriage of the mower too long. I'll just go ahead and open it up and I'll explain a little bit later. But this essentially is kind of like mimicking what happens when grass clippings collect on the undercarriage of your mower. And the outside of it might be dry, but the inside of it is still wet because those grass clippings are wet. And this also can happen if you heap heavy grass mulches on the garden too, where you can get this matted down, especially when it rains. But I'm just going to go ahead and open this up and show you what is on the inside, all right? So it's green in there, and there's a whole bunch of young maggots, all right? And these they're not very large right now, but they're stable fly maggots. And so if you're wondering why you're being bitten, you know, in the evening when you're working outdoors, well, you yourself are promoting the population increase of stable flies because they just love to breed in this stuff. Yeah, this is sort of like what would occur in a feedlot too when you have grasses and cow pies and the like that would accumulate too. So sanitation is really important, especially with the mower, and then making sure that if you use grass clippings, don't heap them up too heavy around the plants because they need to dry out a little bit. Otherwise, they'll start to rot, and then you'll have this mess here that stable fly maggots just love.
Excellent.
Now, these little flies coming around my face, Jim, are those fruit flies from this?
Oh, there's I guess dung flies, small dung
Oh,
flies.
that's why they're around my face. I got it. Yeah,
Face,
okay.
and you
Thanks.
have like sap beetles, and you got all these mites, and there's even like staphylinids, or what we call rove beetles, already there to feed on the maggots. So they're a beneficial insect. There's a rove beetle there. But anyway, that's the point. You know, don't let this stuff.
So would this
accumulate.
also promote fruit flies around the house that would get into your...
No, it wouldn't, because
No?
this is just too fetid is the word, I guess. You know, just too smelly and decomposed. And
All right.
you got a clean shirt, Dennis.
Okay, Dennis, what do you have for us tonight?
I have bat droppings.
Oh, we got a great start tonight, don't we?
Well, this is the time of year. We always say when it comes to bats, wait till the end of July and let them fly till July, because the young of the year, as of 2 weeks ago, are starting to come out and get into homes. So this is the time of year you can use exclusion devices to help with the bats. Now, what would happen, these are the drop-ins you might see, but you're going to see this time of year is small bats, young of the year, flying around in the home. And what you want to use is some exclusion devices. Let me get a couple here. And wherever you see bats coming in and out of the house, you can use these devices. And what happens, they can go in these devices from a corner and come out, but they usually don't figure out how to get back up in there. And this one is much smaller at this end. So this end goes against the house, the bat comes out, but especially if it's at an angle, he'll try to come back in here where he smells his musk and odor and not go back up here. And so these are exclusion devices for bats. And after you leave these up for a couple of days, then you can plug the holes. Once the holes are plugged, then those bats that would be out, they have to find another location. So you want to leave these up for at least 3 or 4 days and make sure the bats are out of the attic before you plug the hole.
Excellent. Thank you, Dennis. Sarah, I assume we have no manure of any sort.
No manure, but my own little problem here. This is Aster yellows. And these are coneflowers. They should look like this or have, pink petals or purple petals. But you see here we've got these really strange colored projections growing out the top of the flowers. And if you look closely at the petals of these infected flowers, the petals are kind of greenish. They didn't color up properly. So these plants are infected by the Aster yellows, which mycoplasma, kind of a virus-like disease that's transmitted from plant to plant by leafhoppers. And unfortunately, when a plant is infected, there is no cure. There's no way to get rid of it. So the best option for your garden is just to get rid of these plants, dig them up and get rid of them, rogue them out, as Lauren would say, and plant something that is more resistant to Aster yellows. Some of the coneflower cultivars tend to be pretty susceptible. There are some of the newer ones that tend to have a little bit more resistance. So if you really love coneflowers and you're having trouble in your garden, you might want to try some of the newer cultivars and see if they perform better. But Aster yellows affects a lot of different plants, not just coneflowers. You can see it in daisies and phlox and all sorts of different plants.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Some botanists may look at that and think this is the next
Yeah.
best
Kind of cool looking, actually.
Single banner.
Yeah.
Okay, Jeff, you always do this. You bring in that fabulous.
Yeah, I know. It's this time of year, and the next time I'm on, I don't know what it'll be doing, so I thought I better bring it while I could. So we have the one in bloom here is limelight hydrangea. So it's hydrangea paniculata. So and I've seen them around town the last couple of days. I've noticed them in a few different places. So it's really putting on a show. And the weather was good this year. And I don't know, my particular shrub has maybe 35, 40 blooms on it right now. It's really covered. So it's really fun right now. Mm-hmm. And then just to kind of contrast, this is oak leaf hydrangea. So it bloomed earlier in the year, but it's still attractive and it kind of offers some different texture and contrast in the garden. So it's still kind of fun to have that salmon along with the white out there. So the hydrangeas, they just kind of give some more. So anyway.
Especially if you're not trying to deal with the pink and blue ones.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Okay, Jim, you get the first picture question. This is a Lincoln viewer that has bush beans, and he thinks something is eating the leaves, and then the beans themselves have black spots on them. He wonders, is it a critter or a rots and spots or an insect issue?
Yeah, it would be an insect issue. That's bean leaf beetle, and we have 2 generations of them this year. It seems like a lot of us escaped the first generation, maybe because they weren't numerous enough or they were late, but now the second generation has emerged, the adult, and they cause that lacing of the leaves, but also they will chew into those newly green developing. You're anticipating these delicious green beans, and you're having all those little feeding scars which turn black. And so it's really hard to cut around that when you're hungry and want to eat it or something like that. So control is very difficult. Initially, what you try to do is be alert to the presence of bean leaf beetle in the season. And then if you want to apply something like carbaryl a few times on the plants, they're not flowering at this point, that will set the population down a little bit. And then just be alert to them. If you want to try to treat closer to the flowering time, you'd have to use something like pyrethrins, which breaks down in 1 day, so that there's no residues whatsoever on the plant or whatever like that. So keep that in mind. Pyrethrins would be the quick and dirty way to knock them down when you have to, maybe at this time of the year when you're still trying to get some beans.
All right, thank you, Jim. Dennis, this is an Omaha viewer who says something is digging holes in her mother's rock wall. Has a couple of pictures there. One's round, one's flatter. They're kicking soil into piles. She wonders, is it a critter? Is it an insect? And what should she do to control it?
Okay, well, the way the holes are completely horizontal and the way the soil looks granular, I'm going to go with cicada killing wasp versus a vole, especially that one there. You can see the hole is completely vertical. And do you agree, Jim?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. So a cicada wasp, they're solitaire and they kill cicadas, and it's the female who's going to put a cicada in there and lay eggs in it, correct? And they're not, I've never had a problem with cicada wasps. They're our largest wasp, but it's hard to get stung by them.
They like those sunny exposures, and
Yeah.
Dennis is right. It's hard to get stung by
Yeah,
them.
real hard.
So she's actually lucky that she has cicada killers instead of voles or
Right.
Well, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest problem and there's not much you can do because spraying anything in the hole is not going to do much for the one that's digging the hole. It's only going to kill the one for next year, is that it's undermining your wall.
Yeah.
And so you may want to try to pack in there some soil with some clay so the wall doesn't start to shift.
Grow hens and chicks in there.
Okay, put an egg inside it, Jim said.
Those plants.
Oh, I think he said hens and chickens.
Oh,
So throw
totally
an
out
Easter
of
egg in there and call it good.
Okay, Sarah, you have one that we have not yet had this year. This is a Fremont viewer that has a potato that looks like this, which they think looks a little unappetizing.
It does. This is potato scab, which is a very common disease in potatoes. And the nice thing about potato scab is that usually it's pretty much surface. It affects the skin and the outer layers of the potato, but you can still trim this off, pare these spots off, and you can still eat the potato. It's, you know, if you're growing for market or something, it can be a problem because the potatoes look really unappetizing and they're not very marketable, but they are still definitely edible. The fungus tends to build up in the soil if you grow potatoes in the same spot or in the same garden year after year. So garden rotation is a really important management consideration. The other thing you want to think about then also is resistant varieties, because there are some potatoes that are much more resistant than others. So look into that next year when you're buying your seed potatoes and try to find some that have good resistance to potato scab.
Excellent, thank you, Sarah. Okay, this is one of many oak questions,
Okay.
Jeff.
All right.
Lots of issues, and this person has a swamp white oak, a couple of years old, 5 feet tall, full sun, sees lace bugs, etc., but looks like it has other issues too. So what would you recommend here?
Well, what would I guess I don't know if I would get too concerned right now. You know, looking at this, my first thought is maybe that the plant may be planted a little deep. You know, I would look at pulling that edging, the wood edging you have, and some of the mulch back and see where we are with the height of the plant and how it was planted. I know it's been in the ground a couple of years. You know, the other side of it too is this time of year, I'm noticing with a lot of trees that some of the leaves here they've put on in the last month or so, maybe because of the rain and the weather, maybe a little chlorotic, the tips, and they show some dieback and that sort of thing. I have a sugar maple at home that pushed some leaves and it's kind of doing the same thing. So I don't know if I'd be overly concerned with that, but let's look at good cultural practices.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, we've visited plenty of wonderful landscapes over the years, and tonight we have another special treat for you. We recently went to the home of a Lincoln artist and found that painting and sculpture weren't confined to her studio. For our first feature, we'd like to invite you to see how your garden can become a work of art. The home of Charles Wegner and Barbara Matley is the epitome of the garden as art and art in the garden. The house was designed to take advantage of the spectacular views of this beautiful space, which, like all gardens, is a work of art, progressing over time, changing with time, reflecting the lifestyle and the characteristics and the feelings of the owners themselves. It is the kind of oasis space where there is whimsy, beautiful plant materials that are used as pieces of art itself that is sculpted, and it's the kind of place where you really don't want to leave once you've entered the property. The intrigue of a garden is in the paths and the way they lead people into and through the spaces, and then what you might discover at the end, if indeed there even is an end. The journey is wonderful, and along the way you find all sorts of things in this garden that were created by Charles and Barbara working together. We have such interesting things as benches and bird baths and bits and pieces of sculpture that are leaf castings. Charles does these out of concrete, so the material is solid and strong, and the paint and the finish are delicate and beautiful. They will hold up forever, and there's something to be discovered along the way. There are succulents all over the garden. Some of them want to live here kind of during the winter. Many of them spend their afternoons and evenings in those long winter days in the sunshine in the house in the atrium or tucked into the garage. And then we find things along the way like chimney pots or large containers like this that have unusual annuals in them, tiny little fairy gardens with all sorts of bitsy little pieces of furniture, little tiny animals that just make it so much fun to visit this fabulous space. The garden was designed with a whole series of paths, and they're different materials and they lead to different places and spaces. Some of them end in sunshine where you can see through to the other side of the property. Others have an unusual plant, they have a piece of sculpture, they have something that you would normally think of as growing low to the ground, staked vertically into a canopy. So you get all of these great experiences, of course, in this wealth of plant material. Different textures, different colors, things that are evergreen, plants that are deciduous, plants that are going to change with the seasons. So as you walk through the garden, whether it is winter or spring, you get a totally different experience. People look at a garden like this and they think the management of it is just going to take forever and be overwhelming. But Charles and Barbara love it, and if you love it, you're going to take great care of it, and that is exactly what they do in this beautiful garden space. One of the things that really works so well in this garden space is how hard materials meet soft materials in really different combinations. Who would ever think to use monster big old boulders and then combine everything from rhubarb to dinosaur kale to a monster old banana with the fine texture of an evergreen on standard. So if you look at how this would change or think about how this would change in the winter months, the banana disappears, the rhubarb goes to bed, the kale is maybe still there, depending on whether they have eaten it, and then the evergreens make it a little bit more of a quiet space. This is a great garden, the reflection of the people who live here and love this space and invite others to enjoy it as well. You can't ask for anything better than art meets the home, meets the people, meets the garden. We had a fantastic time at Barbara and Charles's home, and we hope it will inspire you to perhaps take a new look at your outdoor living space. Just amazing
Yeah,
to walk through there.
fantastic.
Fun.
Great.
All right, Jim, next picture, speaking of oaks, we have multiples, and this one happens to be in Council Bluffs, an old oak tree. Some of the leaves are turning brown in clumps on the edge, others are small and curling.
Okay, this is what we commonly call oak twig girdler, but it's not this round-headed borer that drops twigs on the ground later on in the season or whatever. This is a tiny little flat-headed borer that is feeding as a larva around the tips, and so eventually it girdles that very thin twig, and whatever is in front of that or toward the outside part where the damage occurred, of course, flags, what we call it. It's rather sudden, and it happens with the heats of August, and then all of a sudden we have these huge trees that have they're almost uniformly spaced splotches that are flagging of the large trees. Some of the smaller trees can be affected too. It's usually not an issue for control, very difficult to control. It wouldn't be time to control when you see it. It would probably be next year, but it's wide open as to what you can do to try to control it. Happens every other year, doesn't seem to have an impact on the vitality of the tree. Perhaps a small tree might be impacted a little bit more, but one of those things that just happens every other year, at least around this geographic area. The twig girdler, oak twig girdler. It's not going to spread. That's it. What you see is what you get.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Dennis, this is a rural Kennard,
Okay.
Nebraska viewer, and they have all these toads showing up in a cushion storage container on their deck. They want to know what they are. They have trees, no ponds. They'd rather they stayed up as opposed to joining their guests for the quilting parties and things like that. So what are they and what to do?
Well, they're tree frogs. They're our only true tree frog. They are the gray tree frog, the lesser gray tree frog, or Cope's gray tree frog. Very prevalent this year, and their range is extending along the Platte River corridor. They just eat a lot of insects, and what they're going to go for is for the light. So if there's shining lights that attract moths and insects, they're going to be there. So if you have lights around your quilt, they will be there. If you keep the quilt in the dark, they'll probably stay away from it. So they don't like dry locations, and they don't like those that don't have insects. So those are two ways. But otherwise, they're not going to hurt anything. They're fun.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, cucumbers. This is a viewer who has the same problem with cukes every year. They start out thrifty and then spots develop on the foliage, the plants die back, and the patch gets ruined. They want to know what to do to keep this from happening.
Well, those leaf spots don't look like, anthracnose or one of the typical cucumber leaf spots to me. It looks more like there's a wilt problem going on with these plants. And so there's two common wilts that we see in the cucurbits. There could be either bacterial wilt, which is spread by the cucumber beetles, or fusarium wilt, which is a soil-borne fungus. So depending on which type of wilt it is, if it's bacterial wilt, you need to control the cucumber beetles earlier in the season. If it's fusarium wilt, then you need to think about rotation because the fungus stays active in the soil for a long time, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So you really need to either buy varieties that have good resistance to the various races of fusarium that are out there, or you just need to rotate so that you're not planting plants in the same infected ground every year. Once they are infected and they're starting to wilt, there's really nothing you can do. You just have to pull the plant out and just let it go.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Jeff, you have a couple of different pictures of spruce from a couple of different viewers. The first one has a Black Hills doing this, kind of losing the needles from the top down, and the second viewer has browning from the bottom up. Started about 90 days ago, and you can almost see it spreading day by day. So disease, environmental, canker.
The first one, I don't know, sir, that kind of looked like a canker maybe to me, the top of that.
I quite often see cankers infecting spruces at the top of the tree like that.
Right.
So if it was a canker, you would look at the base of that dead section or the section that's dying, and if there's sap leaking out of the bark, and when the sap dries, it turns white. If you see these white streaks of bark or of sap, that might indicate that there's a canker there.
So, if anything, you could think about if you find that, prune below the canker, see if we can give the tree another chance. The second picture with the bottom there looks like perhaps needle cast or perhaps spider mites. I also kind of think that looks to me like sprinkler, perhaps. Seems like to be at the right height of that. So if you have been running your sprinklers and hitting the trees in the same locations, maybe look at changing that.
All right, thanks, guys. Well, with the season winding down, it's time to take stock of your ornamentals. Some have the potential to give you some fantastic fall and winter interest in your landscape. Some need to be cut back as their flowers fade. For this week's Green and Growing tip, we'll sort out some of the ones that stay and some of the ones that should go. We're approaching the time of year when things are spectacular in gardens in Nebraska. It's also the time to start thinking about what you want to let stand over the winter months and what you might want to cut back. A couple of things to think about on that are the seed heads going to be beautiful and contribute to the winter landscape, like the Blonde Ambition or switchgrass, or are they going to seed themselves all over the place, like the switchgrass? Are they going to give you some structure like the Russian sage will? Do you need to let things like the roses and the butterfly bushes stand over the winter months so that those canes or those stems don't winter kill any worse than they would otherwise? How about the coneflowers or the rudbeckias? Great seed heads, but if we also have things like the asters that are very, very dense, you can end up with a lot of issues with voles and those winter critters. So a part of the discussion about what you're going to let stand over the winter months also has to do with what will attack your plants when you are not paying attention or when we do have that snow on the ground in January.
It's all yours.
There's no need to give those little beasties food and shelter over the winter months, especially since Dennis likes them and releases them into our garden. And right now is a really good time to survey those ornamentals and keep those pruning shears ready. So we will be doing a little bit of cutback cleanup just to spite you. Good. All right, we have a question from Niobrara, Jim, which is a fun one. Catalpa has worms on the plant and are obviously eating the catalpa, wonders whether they should pick them off or spray them. And if so, with what?
That's Catalpa sphinx caterpillar. They're kind of black and yellow, mostly blackish in color. Their generation is finishing up, so if they're fairly large, there's really no point in spraying them. If they were young and you had a smaller tree and you were concerned about stressing it or something, you could hit it with Bacillus thuringiensis or a number of different topical kinds of insecticides. But normally we just, I mean, you've had issues with that, Jeff, on the campus. I think you just neglect it, right?
Well, I'd neglect is the right word, but using integrated pest management, we decided that it wasn't causing enough damage to the tree.
Purposeful neglect.
Integrated pest management, not neglect.
Okay, this is a Grand Island viewer.
Okay.
Wonders whether prairie dogs are protected here. If they're not, how do you get rid of them?
They are not protected in the state of Nebraska. They're considered a vermin in the state of Nebraska, one of the few states that has a blanket. You can take them. They want you to take them. There's several ways. There is toxicants. Shooting does kill some, but it's not going to control them whatsoever. There's also traps, and there's gases and bait toxicants. Most of those toxicants are restricted use, the ones that work the best, so therefore your best bet is to get a license. If it's a larger property, you can get a private pesticide license to apply a restricted use bait for them.
All right.
And we do have an excellent guide for prairie dog control.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Dennis. Sarah, this is the handful of pear questions again.
Okay.
Most of them came with pictures, which we've had about every week. So what is the deal now? Is it rust? Is it leaf spot? Do we know? What are we telling people?
Well, pears are susceptible to several different fungal leaf spots. They can get cedar apple rust. There's a couple of others with really long names. But we had really excellent conditions this spring with all the rain that we had for these leaf diseases to really take hold and get going. So your trees were infected way back in April and May. At this point in the season, even though the symptoms are really obvious now, and probably leaves are dropping, heavily infected leaves usually will fall from the tree, so you'll get early defoliation on these trees. But there really is nothing you can do for control right now. It's not worthwhile to spray a fungicide. The leaves are not at the stage where they're susceptible to infection anymore, and so a fungicide is really not going to help you at all. The one thing that you can do at this point in the season is to rake up those leaves as they fall and get rid of them. You don't want to just mow them into the turf because they have fungal structures on them. They'll serve to be an inoculum source to reinfect the trees next year. So good sanitation now and through the rest of the year is going to be important to try to keep the disease pressure down for next year. And that's about the best you can do, aside from just good tree management. Keep the trees well watered, make sure they have good mulch, so that they're not stressed by any other things other than this leaf drop.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Jeff, this is a Beatrice viewer that has Weigioia. Wonders when they should be pruned and by how much, since they're early spring bloomers.
Right.
And then she's also seeing some that have really big leaves, wondering if she should just go ahead and cut those off now.
So she has some canes maybe coming in out of the graft or something like that, or from the rootstock. So you're right. So those are the ones that she could take out now. Because they bloom in the spring, we may be getting at the tail end of any kind of pruning we'd want to do for next year. So if you have some pruning you want to do for shape, or if you have some branches that are causing problems, let's say they're next to the house or a sidewalk, that's not a problem. I don't know if I would get too carried away with doing a lot of pruning right now at this stage of the year. We don't want to encourage any growth going into the fall either. So.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, we are busy getting ready for harvest out at our garden. The tomatoes are turning red, the pumpkins are turning orange, and the beans and peppers are coming in nicely. Before we go to break, let's take a minute to visit our garden. This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, our master gardeners have been doing a wonderful job watching things grow, keeping track of all the weeds, and getting rid of them. A couple of things of note. First off, they found some squash bugs, little tiny bitty ones, and they found some eggs, and they squished the eggs, and we're going to keep track of those little critters. They also took a note of the Malabar spinach, which is climbing very rapidly up one of the vertical nets. It is a beautiful plant, nice kind of a reddish purple stem, just coming into flower, thick leaves. The leaves actually thrive in the heat, so as opposed to other spinaches that tend to bolt, this is one that will go through the summer months and it tastes spectacular. Over the weekend, they also plucked off a couple of our watermelons, and the little ones that are yellow are a bit difficult to tell when they're ripe because you don't see that nice yellow patch on the underside of something that's already yellow. So they broke it open, they had a bite, it was really excellent. We'll be watching for more of those, and that's what's happening this week in the Backyard Farmer Garden. We need to take a short break. Stay with us. We've got the plant of the week and the lightning round coming up right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. You still have time to get your questions answered. Just give us a call at 1-800-676-5446. Later on in the program, we'll hear from Jonathan Larson about squash vine borers. But right now, time to start the lightning round. Are you ready, Jeff?
No, I'm not. Go ahead.
We have an Omaha viewer who wonders if there is such a thing as a fragrant flowering shade tree that could replace her big flowering cherry.
A fragrant flowering shade tree. Yeah, there are. You know, Yellowwood has some fragrance to it, and it's really pretty. So that might be one you might want to try.
Excellent. So if people have dead stuff in their plants right now, even though you just said don't prune, should they prune that out?
Yeah, anything that's dead or damaged or like I said, in the way that's causing problems, you can go ahead and take that out. Just don't get too carried away.
Okay. We have a viewer that has a 10-year-old ball willow, one of those big round things, browning significantly. Any hope, or is 10 years?
10 years is pretty good, and you know it may, depending on what the rootstock is, if you cut it back, you may get a surprise. So.
Okay. A Grafton viewer has a 30-year-old Bradford pear, and it looks like the bark is blasting off. Any hope for that one, or?
That's pretty good for a Bradford pear, so they should be very pleased. And if they want to do another pear, they can do that if they like. There's a lot of other good choices, but sometimes pears are nice. So.
All right. Excellent. Nice job, Sarah. First rots and spots in the lightning round.
Maybe she'll be at a disadvantage.
See how it goes.
Yeah.
All right. Several people are talking about black growths that look like black hot dogs on choke cherry. What is that, and what should they do about it?
That would most likely be black knot, which is a fungal infection of the bark, and you just have to prune it out.
All right. We had someone send in a question about red veins in their chrysanthemum leaves. Just the veins? Any notion on that? A virus or something?
No, I've never heard of that before, and I don't think I've ever seen it, so I'm not sure on that one.
Picture.
Yeah.
We have many people with purple dome aster that say all they have is a tuft of foliage at the top. Is there any way to manage whatever happens to those lower leaves?
Well, they get a fungus that infects the leaves early in the spring, and if this happens every year in your garden, you need to start spraying some preventive fungicides early as the plants are just getting started growing. At this point, there's not much you can do now.
All right. Last week we had a question about elms that were weeping from the trunk. We have the same question again from a different location in the state. Elms weeping from the trunk.
So it could be some bark damage, and the tree is leaking around the damaged sections of bark. Could be cankers. Willows are also very prone to cankers, and they could weep around that. Could be something like wetwood, which is a bacterial infection of the wood itself, and then the trunk weeps. So probably, again, pictures. We need to see the bark a little bit more so we can figure out exactly what's going on there.
Excellent. Nice job.
Jeff's ahead for a moment.
You ready, Dennis?
Like lunch meat, since Lauren isn't.
Okay, there is a cone-shaped thing that is full of poison peanuts. Does that work to kill anything?
Well, yeah, especially if you feed it to your kids. If it accepts it, it will kill it. I don't like those types of devices, and they don't work on many things. Let's put it that way.
Okay. How about a raw egg and pepper spray for deterring animals?
Pepper spray works if it's not something they really have to have. Raw egg, not much.
Okay. What would dig and tunnel along a railroad tie wall and then poke up?
A mole.
A mole. All right.
Or a vole if it's an open hole. If it's closed hole, a mole.
Okay. So we have multiple acreages that are suburban acreages that have ponds. Apparently, a muskrat has taken up residence. Any notion on what they should do about him or her?
Yes, you can have them trapped
Okay.
in the proper season.
All right. So if you knock squirrel nests down now, will they rebuild them again in the same spot, or will they finally relocate?
They'll probably rebuild for the winter.
Okay. So there's no hope in squirreldom.
Right.
Okay. Darn.
We'll see what happens.
All right, Jim,
Okay,
you
I
ready?
can go for 6. All right,
Okay.
ready.
You can do it.
So lots of gardens have really lovely cabbages. Are the loopers still active?
Yes, they will, but until the end of the season, so harvest early.
Okay. What about, what are those giant bright yellow and black spiders, and are they good guys or bad guys?
The yellow and black garden spider, and they feed on grasshoppers. They're day active, and so let them do their job in controlling those grasshopper nymphs.
Okay, it seems like a lot of people think they have stalk borers still in various plants. Anything to do?
Stalk borers do hang around just a little bit into the season, but you can't really do much about it anymore. The season's just about over. It's mainly in the springtime when you have to be concerned about the plants that you transplant into the garden.
Okay. We have a viewer who used a solution of Dawn and water, and it killed the insects, but it also did some plant damage. Is that one you recommend?
I would avoid that. I would go ahead and purchase an approved insecticidal soap product at your local garden center.
Okay. So we have an army of crickets wandering around right now.
Yes, yeah, we have high populations of crickets right now, and so yeah, we might have to deal with them invading homes later on. So seal those cracks and crevices around the outside of the house.
Excellent. Look at there. We had.
Well, we tied.
Yep.
Good job.
Okay, so Gladys has brought us something that I don't believe she has ever brought us before.
This is a very unusual thing. It's called ribbon bush. So it has flat stems, and she tells us that it has green flowers, likes full sun, and it's not hardy here. So, Sarah, you can't grow it at home because it's native to the Solomon Islands.
Oh, wow.
So, wow. So it's something that probably sometime in October would not like it very much around here. So anyway, it's not hardy around here, and she says that it's relatively short-lived. And then our flowers that we have a couple orange, I guess kind of a purple and a yellow, are calla lilies. And so she talks about it being a water plant, also not hardy here. She lets the frost hit it in the fall, and then she'll move it into the garage. And again, likes lots of water and full sun.
And quite a very unusual combination.
Yeah,
from
that ribbon bush is really cool.
Yeah.
What would you call that as far as texture goes?
Weird. Sort of
Kind of
neat.
like an insect, tapeworm,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Segmented like
Segmented.
they do.
Segmented.
Saw-like.
Yeah, I wonder
Yeah.
what the whole plant looks like, if it's just this big bush like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
very
unusual.
Cool. Very
Very cool.
interesting. All right. Well, thanks to Gladys as always. She also did ask us to correct the name that she gave for last week's Plant of the Week. She had said it was Mandevilla, and it was instead Alamanda.
Well,
So Mandevilla comes in different colors than Alamanda. And we had a viewer that caught that on Facebook too. So thank you, Gladys, for correcting that. It was still a beautiful plant. All right, Jim, you get the next picture question. And this is actually a couple of questions from different viewers. Bellevue viewer has 3 Japanese maples. One has little cocoons and leaf damage. Like that, and what is that, and what is the treatment? And then this other person, also Omaha, found this hanging over their deck, and it was hanging down by a thin spider web-like string. They thought it was levitating, so that was a little freaky. What is that?
Well, those are all bagworms. We're accustomed to seeing bagworms on conifers like the spruces and the junipers, but they do get on a lot of deciduous trees. And in this case, it's maple. I was surprised by that too. They're getting older, and so they're more difficult to control. So if you have them spread all over the tree, treatment, you might have to call an arborist on that, on treating it, because access is going to be very difficult, and you have to have thorough coverage in order to kill those older bagworms. The one that was dangling down possibly was mature already and is attaching itself to some substrate, because they'll do that on sides of buildings and decks too as well, but most of the time they stay on the tree or the shrub. So you can't control them with non-chemical options right now. Bifenthrin, as the label allows, with don't treating near any bodies of water or whatever, bifenthrin has a residual to it so that it would control them over a period of time. But again, follow the label directions and make sure that it's okay to do.
All right, thank you, Jim. This is a person who wants to know what kind of snake this is, and is there a way, and this is probably particularly true of people who are now doing backyard ponds and have boulders, to discourage them rather than encourage them?
Why?
I knew. I gave you the opening and I knew you would take it.
I don't understand. They're eating insects and a toad. And it's a garter snake for sure, and I think I can see this superlabial, so I'm going to say radix or the plains garter snake. So this is the plains garter snake, extremely common, eats minnows and toads and a lot of insects, doesn't cause any problems, carries no germs and viruses you have to worry about, and it's not going to bite your kids.
In other words, do not try to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sarah, we have not had this one, I don't believe, either, but this is a viewer who has two varieties of feather reed grass, Carl Forster and El Dorado, and I think this is probably El Dorado, and she's seeing this on the El Dorado in particular. What's going on here?
We think that this is a rust that occurs on this particular ornamental grass. And, the rusts are usually two host diseases, but this one I don't think has really been studied very well. We're not really sure what the alternate host is on this one. It may have been, again, because of all the wet weather we had this spring, that maybe these plants are more susceptible this year, or these infections initiated. It's probably not going to cause significant damage on the plant. I would just cut the plants down in the fall like you normally do, or in the spring when you're cleaning up your garden, just remove all the old foliage and get rid of it. And if conditions are drier next year, you may not see this appearing again. But otherwise, it's really not that serious of a problem, so it's probably not worth doing any fungicide applications.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Jeff, this is a Lexington viewer, has two maples about 50 feet apart. They are autumn blaze. Mm-hmm. One is green and the other one is clearly not.
Right.
And they both have cracks along the length of the trunk. I think you can probably see those there. What's up with that, and what are we going to recommend?
Well, the Freeman maples are a hybrid between red and silver maples. And so the positive part about them is that they usually grow fairly rapid and they have nice fall color. And that's what makes them very popular in areas where you have what I would consider deep topsoils. So if you have loamy soils that you would find along a river or something like this. And my guess is when we get out there, the soils are a little harder to grow things in. And so these trees, now that their roots are getting out into those soils, are really not very well adapted to those sites. So I think that probably instead of spending a lot of money trying to treat these, you're probably better off looking at something that might be better suited for that area.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, squash vine borers can do quite a bit of damage to your cucurbits. Fortunately, there are some strategies to help you avoid them. Here to tell us more is Jonathan Larson.
All right, so squash vine borer. This pest is ubiquitous across the United States. It's a lepidopteran pest. That means it's a caterpillar in its damaging stage. And this caterpillar gets into the stems of all of our different cucurbit crops. It can be a real problem for pumpkin growers, winter and summer squash growers, any plant like that. And what happens is the adults will come and find your plant. They'll lay their eggs at the base of the stem. The caterpillar bores in and it kills the plant off right down at the tip of the soil. There's going to be several different symptoms you may notice with this. If you notice things like wilting occurring, it may be too late to save your plant. If you're paying really close attention to your plant, you may actually notice orange sawdust-like frass of the insect exuding out of some of the different parts of the stem. This is a #1 symptom for the squash vine borer. The best thing to do for these is going to be paying attention to your garden and observing for the adults. They're actually a very distinct moth. They're sort of a gray and scarlet color, kind of Ohio State colors, if you will. And they come in and they're attracted to the plants. You can visually observe for them, or you can actually set out yellow bowl traps. If you get plastic yellow bowls and put some soapy water in there, you can use those to monitor for this pest as it comes into your garden. Once you begin to see it, you can make insecticide applications with dusts or with liquid insecticides to the base of your plant. That'll be things like Ortho garden products, Carbaryl, which is 7, many other different kinds of insecticides, pretty much anything you can buy at the store. If you want to go an organic route, you can wrap some foil around the base of the plant to protect it from oviposition by the insect. If you already have an infested plant, you may go in and perform some surgery on your squash plant. Take a really sharp knife, go where you see the frass is exuding out from the plant, take a good slice, open it up, find the caterpillar inside and pull it right out, squish it with your bare hands if you're feeling pretty vindictive, throw it away. Take the plant now and then bury that part of the stem that you have cut open, and you're gonna hope and pray that that'll fuse back together and the plant will be able to make it. So those are some good IPM methods to use against this pest. You're gonna be observing for it and use those different control strategies, and hopefully you'll be able to successfully grow all of your cucurbits this summer.
We're a little late to be helping you with this problem because you want to be on the lookout for those larvae around the end of June. But those IPM management methods are still really good advice to keep in mind when you plant future gardens. And the discussion about biting the head off the insect, just because you can do that if you want, but I'm not going to try that one.
Tastes just like squash.
Yeah. Squash flavored.
Okay, this is a Northeast Council Bluffs picture, and he found this on an annual hanging basket. It's really quite pretty, and wonders what it is, Jim.
That's the nymph of a green June beetle. The scientific name is Acrosternum hilariae, which might mean hilarious, like the colors are on that nymph. But anyway, you don't often see too many green June beetles around here. We do have them. They'll feed on a number of different trees and shrubs, and sometimes in the garden or in field crops. But they usually are so low in numbers, they're not a concern for control.
All right, excellent, quite pretty. Dennis, we have an Elkhorn viewer who has serviceberry that was planted about 5 years ago, had most of the bark eaten off around the shrub, and they think it was deer damage. So do you want to talk a little bit about...
Yeah, looking at it, it's been eaten off a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I don't see marks. It can't be a rabbit. It's something that it looks like it's been stripped downward, which squirrels do, but squirrels usually don't do it that close to the ground. Now, when deer do that, they do it, when they're in velvet, and they do it higher up. That's right down on the ground. And deer are more of a browser, not a stripper. And I can't, even I magnified this and I couldn't see any teeth marks. So I'm a little bit lost on exactly what it could be. It's possible it could be a young deer and it was nibbling and it stripped. But the biggest thing that strips are squirrels. And so, and it looks like it happened very early in the spring or in the late winter. I'm not sure why. But having the cage on there is helpful. But it's not rabbit, it's not vole, I can see that. And it doesn't look like deer to me off the top of my head. I would have to see it when it was fresh to see the teeth marks.
So it's not porcupine?
No, that crossed my mind a little bit, but porcupines like mainly conifers and they're up in them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that does look kind of, but even with porcupine, you see the scratch marks, the teeth marks. Right. There's no teeth marks, it's just grabbed and stripped.
It's probably a neighborhood kid.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Did you make any of the kids mad in the neighborhood?
Okay, Sarah, spots on a tomato. This is from Omaha. What do we think this might be, and is it still edible?
This is a fairly common disease called bacterial spot. And there's 2 related diseases, bacterial spot and bacterial speck. The only real difference is the size of the lesions, and the bacterial spot has larger lesions like this. These should be a little bit raised if you were to run your finger over the top of those. And they stay just on the surface. They don't go into the flesh of the tomato or cause a fruit rot. They just stay on the surface. So again, you could just pare off these lesions from the tomato and still go ahead and use it. There's no reason that you couldn't eat it. If you wanted to control it on the plants, you would need to use a copper fungicide and start spraying the plants in the spring when you start to see the first signs of lesions on the fruits or on the tomatoes. And you'd need to then continue to spray throughout the summer till you're done harvesting.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Speaking of dead things, this is a blue muffin viburnum. This is Cook, Nebraska. 10 to 12 years old, south side of the house between the sidewalk and the wall, and lost some branches, and also still dying on the west and the south, and it is mulched in lava rock. So he's wondering, and there's flies associated with it, but wondering if the lack of moisture in the flies or the environment, and then what does he do about this?
Yeah, I think the lack of moisture, the exposure doesn't help the situation. Although they are very tolerant. It's an Arrowwood viburnum, and we have them on campus on the west side of some buildings, so it gets quite warm there. The lava rock, I guess I would kind of wonder if we have a fabric underneath the rock or plastic, which may contribute again to either keeping the roots too wet or too dry, depending on what's been going on. So we may want to look at that. I would prune the dead out of it, and then I would look at, in the spring, doing some kind of rejuvenation pruning on that. Maybe not taking it all the way to the ground, but taking out several of the bigger canes. It looks like it's kind of been hedged, and see if we can get it back to a natural form, because in a natural form, it's a beautiful plant. So.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Well, we have an announcement of a fun thing going on in the gardening world, and that is that we will be at the State Fair on September 2nd. We will be here, NET will be taping at between 4 and 5, and then we will air on September 3rd. So that'll be a lot of fun. We'll also be there a little earlier in the afternoon answering your questions from the audience. So lots of fun and fried things on a stick. All right, Omaha viewer has, let's see, interesting. An orchard has grasshoppers. What do they do about grasshoppers to take care of?
The grasshoppers are getting older. That's going to be problematic.
Yeah.
Probably maybe associated with some recent mowing, and they moved out of those areas, and they're all over the orchard. The only thing I could possibly think of might be a grasshopper bait that they would feed on, because you certainly can't treat with anything right now with production going on, and the baits would be toward the base of the ground. But that's about all I can offer as far as something to look
Are there traps
into.
for grasshoppers?
Traps?
Yeah.
The old days, they used creosote and trenched, you know?
Okay, well,
But
Apparently not.
They don't do that anymore.
okay. I didn't know if there was like some cones or something that would kind of jump into and not get out of, but.
Oh, no, I don't
Okay.
think so
None of
anymore.
those
They
are
would
very
have
effective.
hopper dozers years ago, but an orchard situation, you just don't have the speed in the area where you can really have a fun time at it.
Okay, Dennis, any updates on armadillos?
We haven't had as many sightings this year as last year, but as you know, last year there were 4 sightings along Interstate 80 and 1 sighting as far north as Norfolk. You would think with the early spring, but I'm not privy to any more. I think only 2 sightings, and they were around mid-state. So, yeah, so you may see them. Best not to pick them up and play with them. They do carry leprosy, so just let them be.
And yeah, we have less than a minute on that note, Sarah. And white mold on peonies. So what do we think that is?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of powdery mildew on peonies and monarda and plants in the vegetable garden, just lots and lots of powdery mildew everywhere. On the ornamentals, there's really no point in applying a fungicide. If you have severe powdery mildew in the vegetable garden, you could use some copper fungicide again to help protect the healthy foliage and keep it from becoming infected, and remove the really heavily infected leaves. That might slow it down so you can get a good harvest.
Okay, and in 20 seconds or less,
Okay.
Jeff, Lindsay, Nebraska, when do you know when butternut squash is ready to pick?
Well, if it wants to start coming off the stem, so wait a little bit, it's a little early. And you'll feel maybe some lightness in the plant itself sometimes as it starts to dry out a little bit. But as it's ready to come off, it'll feel a little tug and it'll come off.
Right, and you did say that you have attempted to grow that with great success.
A variety of squashes. Usually I get squash vine borer and not many fruit, so.
And so- and you end up at farmer's market like
Yeah,
pretty
right,
much the rest of
right,
us who
right.
attempt to grow things that we really shouldn't.
Yeah.
All right.